introduce, thank you for joining the Fisheries Extension Network webinar. I want to thank, we have Larissa Graham and Chris Hale, who are both oil spill science outreach specialists. Larissa's with us from Mississippi. She's worked for Grand Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve in Mississippi and for New York Sea Grant before coming to be the oil spill specialist. And Chris Hale is based out of Corpus Christi, Texas. And they're going to share some of the lessons learned, what they've done with the project in the last 2.5, 3 years that they've been working. So thank you guys, and I will let you start with your talk.
Okay, perfect. So thanks everyone for joining us. We just wanted to talk a little bit today about our oil spill outreach program that's been going since 2014. And today we wanted to, since you guys all focus on fisheries, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the program just in case you're not familiar. And then also share some of the products and resources that we have. And then lastly, just kind of talk a little bit about some lessons learned. I was joking with Chris that I think a lot of the lessons learned are going to be ones that you guys already know, but maybe it'll make you feel better that you're not alone learning those same lessons that we did. So just to start off, I'm sure everybody remembers the oil spill back in 2010. This was one of the largest spills in history. There were more than 200 million gallons of oil that were released from the wellhead before it was capped about 87 days after that initial blowout. And there were about 1.8 million gallons of dispersants that were used to combat the oil. And so because there's so much oil and also so much dispersant, there was a lot of questions that were left, you know, that people really wanted to know the answers to. So back in May of 2010, about a month after the oil spill had started, the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative was formed. And this is a $500 million 10-year research initiative. It's the main goal is to study how oil and dispersants interact with one another, how they move around the environment, and how they impact the Gulf's people, habitats, and animals. So this program is administered by the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, which, if you're not familiar, involves all the 5 Gulf Coast states. And it's important to also point out that this money was non-penalty funds. It actually came from BP, but the money is managed by an independent research board. So BP doesn't have any say in what's funded. Pretty much the research board just reports, you know, how many publications, like things like that, how many data sets are have been collected. So that's a little bit about the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative in case you weren't familiar with it. So because the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative had all this great work that it had funded and all these research results were coming out, they partnered up with Sea Grant to help extend those resources and that science to some of our coastal stakeholders. So they had some outreach programs that they had been working on already, but they knew that Sea Grant really had these connections and trust from these coastal communities. So Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative teamed up with Sea Grant, and in 2014, we formed this oil spill science outreach program. And this is a regional program. This is our team right here. Some of these faces might look familiar. So I'll go from left to right. We have 4 full-time specialists, and so these are 4 staff that are 100% dedicated to sharing oil spill science. We also have a full-time communicator that started in phase 2 of our program, and that phase 2 started last fall, and then a part-time coordinator. So if you look at this picture of our smiling faces, from left to right, this was taken at Sea Grant Week last year. So from left to right, Tara Skelton is our full-time communicator. So she's based with Mississippi, Alabama, Sea Grant. And again, she started with phase 2. We were relying on our Gulf program, the Sea Grant program's communicators, but it was a lot of work for them to do. So we were able to justify hiring our own coordinator in the communications coordinator in phase 2. And then in the middle, you have our 4 specialists. So Emily Long Douglas is with Louisiana Sea Grant. She's based in Baton Rouge, and she focuses on the chemical interactions of oil and dispersants. Monica Wilson is with Florida Sea Grant. She focuses on how oil and dispersants move around the environment. Chris Hale, who I was joking I was going to hold up a cutout of her face since she doesn't have a webcam, but that's what she looks like. So when you hear her voice, that's the face that goes with it. Chris is over in Corpus Christi, Texas with Texas Sea Grant. She focuses on the environmental impacts of the oil spill. Next is me. I am located in Mobile, Alabama with Mississippi, Alabama Sea Grant. I focus on the human health impacts. And then all the way to the right is Steve Sempier. He's our part-time coordinator. He's with Mississippi, Alabama Sea Grant as well. So we each, you can see we cover all 5 of the Gulf Coast states. So we work on this regional basis, but we also have these focus areas. We also have specific audiences that we reach out to. So Chris is the lead for fisheries, and I help her out with that. So together we, focus on some of these topics, but then also work really well as a team. So how and who and how do we reach out to? So our mission is to share peer-reviewed published science with our coastal audiences. And these are folks whose livelihood depends on a healthy Gulf of Mexico. So what we first did, and I'm going to show you a slide in a minute, but the first thing we did was go out and talk with lots and lots of stakeholders just to really assess their needs. And then based on that, we've been creating some outreach products. So in phase 1, which again ended last fall, we mostly focused on outreach publications and then also on these science seminars where we had researchers come in and share information with our stakeholders. So in phase 2, we've kind of, based on the feedback we've gotten, we've diversified a little bit. So we're making more targeted outreach products. So a lot of these are going to be one-pagers or shorter products, because the ones that we have now, which Chris will be talking about, are mostly 8-page documents. And then we have some funding in there for other projects as well, like videos and doing some focus groups, things like that. So just so you know who we reach out to, we have 11 different audiences in phase 2, and they span from emergency responders, natural resource managers, sea grant extension agents, health professionals, and then also, as you would guess, the fishing industry. So I wanted to put up this word cloud just to show you kind of what we've been focusing on, well, maybe the needs of that we've heard from the fishing community. So if you're not familiar with a word cloud, the bigger the word, the more times it came up in conversation. So this is the needs that we've heard, and this is from our fishing community. So that does include sea grant extension agents that work with these folks. So you can see that there's a lot of words that you would expect to be there. So oil and impacts, health, species, you can see snapper, we expect that to be there. Seafood, long-term effects, landings. So these were some of the topics, and lesions too. These were some of the topics that people really wanted to know more about. They wanted to know how the oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, has impacted, these different topics. So I do want to mention that in phase 1, we really focused on Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and now in phase 2, we're trying to broaden that a little bit and focus more on oil spills in general, so that when there is another spill, these outreach materials will be a little bit more general, so they'll be more relevant to the future spills. So with that, I'm going to pause and hand it over to Chris. But first, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions.
No question.
Okay, good.
No
well,
questions.
Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'll mute my line here.
Okay.
And take it away.
Advanced slides. All right. So our team has thus far produced 15 high-quality extension publications, most of which are, like Larissa said, around 8 pages in length. Though we are working on releasing some one-page fact sheets as well. So the information within these publications is the result of our team's efforts to consolidate the peer-reviewed science or the peer-reviewed literature on a variety of topics. And as Larissa was saying, these topics are what our audiences have expressed an interest in or asked us about. So within these publications, we aim to share major findings and key points and explain related scientific concepts. They're designed to resonate with people that may or may not, most likely may not, have a scientific background. So the first one I'm going to talk about or highlight is the fisheries landings. So it's titled Fisheries Landings and Disasters in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is one of the first publications that we released, and it was a topic of big concern identified by many of our sea grant agents, actually. So this publication highlights the concept of landings. So landings data helps people monitor change in the health of fish and shellfish populations over time. However, landings alone cannot determine the cause of disaster impacts to fishery populations, which is what a lot of folks were coming to us asking: did the Deepwater Horizon oil spill cause a change in landing? And this publication explains that there's other factors to consider, such as ocean currents, weather, and management actions when interpreting fisheries trends and answering those kinds of oil spill related questions. For example, in this pub, I highlighted some studies that found that after the oil spill, some fish populations actually increased in study areas. So the scientists that did these kinds of studies concluded that this might be due to the fact that fishing was closed during and after the spill. So fish populations may have fluctuated during that time, thus masking any potentially negative effects that could be occurring from oil and dispersants within those habitats. So it's going to take a long time for scientists to understand the full impact that Deepwater Horizon had on the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem. The next publication I'm highlighting sort of elaborates on that science. This is our impacts from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill on Gulf of Mexico fisheries. And scientists have found that individual fish were harmed during the spill, especially young and larval fish. And scientists tested Gulf killifish, which is often used in laboratory studies. They tested Gulf killifish that were exposed to oil and dispersants and found the negative effects to their gills, their hearts, blood vessels, and embryos, and that's just a short list. Knowing that these negative impacts occur to the individual fish, scientists are then asking the questions and looking to see if these negative impacts to individuals will then transfer to whole populations and whole communities of fish. Impacts to populations are still unclear, but some scientists have found some shifts in diet. So they've conducted some food web studies and found some shifts in diet. So they're keeping an eye on some populations and communities to see how that will change over time. And the readers of this publication are also reminded that, again, many factors must be considered when understanding both short and long-term impacts to fisheries from oil spills. An interesting graphic that is within this publication that you might have use for, or your communities might have use for, is this one. This was adapted from a paper written by Dr. Joel Fodry, and it explains that oil can have direct negative effects on an individual fish, on fish habitat, or on the fishery itself. But what's less understood, again, is how oil impacts fish at the population and community level and the food web level. This fish lesions pub was of high interest, especially in 2010 and 2011, and it came about because the fishermen offshore were bringing in fish that were exhibiting lesions on their skin, which is relatively rare in offshore marine fish populations. Typically, you can find fish skin lesions closer to shore and in nearshore environments where there's more commonly pollutants causing those lesions. So offshore skin lesions was a red flag to those fishermen, so they brought it to the attention of scientists, and there's a large group of scientists tackling this question. They wanted to know if the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was responsible for these strange skin lesions on these fish. They found that they could not reveal a clear cause and effect relationship between the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the fish skin lesions, although they did find that there was a short-term increase in the chemicals related to oil in the areas where the fish with lesions were found. However, they weren't able to link that oil to specific Deepwater Horizon oil itself. So they don't know where this pHs definitely came from. But again, this publication highlights the fact that there's a lot of reasons fish skin lesions occur. Poor nutrition, drastic changes in weather, contact with harmful organisms, and environmental pollution are some of those factors. And many of these factors occur simultaneously, which challenges scientists and resource managers when they're trying to identify the root causes of fish skin lesions. And in conclusion, scientists need to continue collecting long-term baseline data in order to compare fish health over time. The next one of interest to you potentially is the responses of aquatic animals in the Gulf of Mexico to oil and dispersants. So this publication explains how oil and dispersants can affect a variety of different aquatic animals. And it focuses on PAHs, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are the chemicals in oil that potentially harm aquatic organisms. Those are the chemicals I was talking about earlier in the last slide about skin lesions. So in some animals, like jellyfish and copepods, they do accumulate PAHs in their bodies. But vertebrates, like fish, can break down those chemicals and those oil-based compounds in their bodies. And in some cases, the mechanisms that break down that oil can be used by scientists to detect oil exposure. So this publication includes highlights of some of the studies that look at oil's impacts and how it differs in different fish based on life stage and on environmental conditions. And it talks about those physical impairments that I mentioned earlier, such as impacts to embryos and hearts and gills and so on. One graphic within that publication that may be of interest to you is this one, and it shows the process for PAH bioaccumulation in some species and how it's broken down in other species. So like I was saying, when fish are exposed to PAHs, there's a special gene called CYP1A, and this gene gets turned up, kind of like a radio dial. You can turn it up or turn it down. So this CYP1A gene gets turned up when it's been exposed to PAHs, and it thus produces more protein that helps the fish break down the PAHs and remove it from their system. The next pub I'd like to share with you guys is our Healthy Seafood Pub. This one continues to be very popular. And of course, one of the biggest questions we had after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was, is our seafood safe to eat? And it's not as common a question today as it was, but we still do get questions about the health and quality of seafood in the Gulf. And so this publication explains that federal and state agencies closed waters to fishing during the spill, and they developed a plan to collect seafood samples and test them for chemicals found in oil and dispersants before reopening those fishing areas. It goes on to explain that of the 22,000 seafood samples that these agencies tested during the spill, none were over the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's level of concern, which means they're safe for consumption. The pub also outlines studies, or the studies that occurred to test more vulnerable human populations that may eat more seafood than your average person, and that was done to ensure that seafood is safe for those communities as well. Some of the graphics within the Healthy Seafood publications include this one. This is a table that compares seafood samples that were collected by NOAA before and after the spill to the FDA's level of concern. So all of these samples were well below the level of concern, which again means that they were safe for consumption. Some other graphics also within that Healthy Seafood Pub are these two. The one on the right outlines the process that the process for seafood testing before an area was reopened to fishing. And actually, some of our sea grant agents here in the Gulf participated in this process, such as you can see that picture of the nose, the little nose icon in the middle of the right-hand side graphic. Some of our agents were trained on how to sniff out tainted seafood, and they worked with the seafood and fishing industries to train them on how to identify fish that might possibly have been exposed. So again, that's just the process on the right. On the left is some of the detailed sampling. The level of concern for state and federal testing programs, which again, everything was determined safe for consumption. The last publication I want to bring to your attention is this mental health one. So we had this publication on the impacts of this spill to residents' mental health because it has a lot to do with the fishing industry. Residents that relied on Gulf-dependent industries for their source of income were found to be more likely to feel anxiety or to feel depressed. Of course, they participated in habits like drinking or having more thoughts of suicide compared to other residents. And although many residents that relied on Gulf-dependent industries for their source of income were more likely to feel anxious or stressed during and after the spill, those with ties to the fishing industry were more likely to have these types of negative feelings than others who did not rely on the Gulf for a source of income, or who did rely on the Gulf. And the scientists that conduct these mental health studies have an idea that this has something to do with the idea of community attachment. So community attachment is sort of a concept that relates how close community members feel to each other and to the place where they live. And so the idea is that because they were so close to each other and tied so closely to where they live, that actually hindered how resilient they were after the oil spill. This attachment made them less likely to leave the place or want to leave the place where they lived to find alternative sources of income. So those are the main fisheries-related publications. I also wanted to point out that in addition to those publications, we hold seminars and workshops. And here's a list of some of the topics that we've covered in past seminars. Beaches, mangroves, deep sea. You can read the list yourself. They're all posted on our website, and the website is gulfseagrant.org/oil spill outreach. So basically, you can just Google Sea Grant in the Gulf of Mexico, and this will pop up. So basically, all of our products are housed within this website. And just so you know, for phase 2, we are redesigning our website to make it look more hip and modern. So at some point in the near future, it might not look like this, but just so you know, if you want access to any of our recorded seminars or workshops, you can find it here. And you can also download all of our publications and other reports, as well as workshop announcements and other things that we want to boast about. Just go to our website and keep in touch with us there. So besides updating our website, what else are we up to going forward? Well, for phase 2, we might be coming to a region near you. In phase 2, we've decided to expand our program nationally. We'll be hosting regional meetings throughout the United States. For example, Larissa is lead for the Great Lakes, so she'll be extending our oil spill science into the Great Lakes region. And in fact, next week in Ohio, she's hosting a panel discussion at the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network meeting, and she's also co-hosting a crude move symposium to look at the risks of transporting oil around the Great Lakes region. So if you're interested in that crude move symposium, leave a note in the Zoom chat box here today with your email, or you can contact Larissa directly if you want more information about it. But also, in addition to the Great Lakes, we're tapping into our partners up in Alaska, Pacific Northwest, so all along the West Coast, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, and Caribbean regions. Each member of our team has been identified as a lead for each of the regions that have expressed interest in learning more about oil spill science and what we can offer. Also, more specifically to fisheries, we have a few new outreach publications that we're working on. One will focus on oysters. There's been a lot of questions about oil spill impacts to oysters, so I'll be tackling that question. We also have one, or some actually, in the works that focus on habitats that fish rely on, such as wetlands and mangroves. And tomorrow, actually, we're just about ready to publicly release our new one-pager boater's guide. That's the picture you see there on the right of the screen. This is a one-page fact sheet designed for all types of boaters, but your community might be interested in it because it quickly and succinctly lists the agencies that you can contact throughout the Gulf if you do have a spill. And we're excited to release it because we're planning to print it on waterproof paper, which is a first for our team. and in that way can live on boats and other wet environments. Anyway, we mentioned earlier, Larissa mentioned earlier, that in phase 2, we're going to be creating outreach products that are more targeted with some of our audiences and related to fisheries. Larissa and I are planning to conduct some fisheries focus groups so that we can better assess their needs, the fishing community needs, and what they prefer as far as these outreach products. So from that input, we can then do a better job of giving them something they can use. So with that being said, if there's any questions about anything I've said thus far, please chat your questions to us. But it would also be a great time to speak up if you've got any input yourself about oil spill topics you are interested in, any questions or issues or anything at all related to oil spills that you would like my team to tackle. We definitely value your input. We take all of that very seriously. We know everything our audiences say so that we can create better products. So please, if you don't have any questions now or thoughts about anything, you can contact us at any time. So while we wait for any questions, I'll just hand this back over to Larissa.
Great, thanks, Chris. Mark, are there any questions?
No questions at this time. So, folks, we've got plenty of time. So we'll hang out for a few minutes and see. Again, feel free to you can ask questions in either Q&A or chat. As far as contact information goes, Larissa, could you put your email in chat? Maybe?
Sure can.
Whatever. If there's a general contact email that might be helpful, you can put that in chat. And I put links. I put links in chat for you guys' website and also one for the publications too. So we'll just take a minute or two and hang out. And
yeah, that's good because my computer's not letting me advance slides. So good. Ask some questions because the computer apparently needs time to think. It's not happy.
So I was down in Louisiana. My wife went to graduate school at LSU, so we moved right around 2008, around the time the oil spill happened. So sort of the sum total of everything, I mean, is it, what were the negative impacts from a fishing and a fishery standpoint? Sort of the general, I think the takeaway for a lot of the general public is, yeah, it seemed like it was terrible, but from a sort of real world scenario, not so much. Is that sort of a myth, or was that the case, or what's the feeling in the scientific community?
Chris, you want to take it?
So you're asking, was it as bad as people are saying?
Yeah, or what the sort of, I mean, as someone who's not a fishery guy or someone who's probably it thinks like a lot of the general public does, yeah, it seemed awful and terrible, but at least from the outside, we didn't hear, historically at least, being 10 years removed, we don't hear a lot about it now. So I guess one of my questions is, are we sort of totally recovered at this point? Things are back to normal, or are there still industries or food sources that are suffering because of it?
I would not say that we're totally recovered, though there are, there's a huge group of scientists that think and state and show that our environment is incredibly resilient, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. And so there's going to be a lot more that we still need to answer long term. And we look to other spills as examples. For example, although it was a very different type of spill, the Exxon Valdez spill in '89, it took 30 years for scientists to get a handle on the sort of population and community-wide impacts that happened as a result. So, knowing that it's going to take time, scientists are, sort of setting themselves up for the long haul to see and follow these changes in fish populations. For example, I mentioned that one with the diet shift. The red snapper was found to have changed its diet after the spill. So we're going to keep an eye, our scientists are going to keep an eye on the snapper and the kinds of diets and the whole food web surrounding the snapper to see what changes over time. So basically what I'm saying is there's still a lot of unanswered questions. There's still also, yeah.
I was going to say, from a scientific standpoint, we need to, it's not like everybody can close shop and go home, we're done. We still need, from a research standpoint, we still need to be on top of any changes that might occur and look at that in the context of the spill and what effect that might have.
Exactly. And there's a lot of interest in need for just baseline data. You know, fish health data over time is, you know, it's very specific data is absent from the Gulf of Mexico. So just creating this, you know, long-term data sets is something that the Gulf of Mexico is working really hard to do so that we can continue to monitor it.
So I guess that was a positive, I guess, outcome of the spill. I guess prior to the spill, was there not a lot of that data there?
You know, separate sort of state agencies have ownership over their own data sets. For example, Texas Parks and Wildlife has conducted 40 years worth of data, but it's very specific to their agency programs and doesn't always include some of the types of data that other scientists need. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management also has about 40 to 50 years worth of oceanographic data. So putting those pieces all together takes time, and also filling in the gaps of information is taking time. And so you're right. Although this is a terrible tragedy, a lot of really wonderful research is coming out, and people are really just slowly putting together the pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, folks, we'll just take another 30 seconds. No questions. We'll take another 30 seconds and give folks a chance to ask any last minute questions.
Hey, Chris, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, while we're waiting, my computer has now totally frozen, but I can still hear you guys. So do you mind pulling up the presentation and sharing your screen if possible?
So you'll want, let's see, can you stop sharing, Larissa, or it won't even let you do that?
No, I'm stuck on the task manager page. I don't know what's happening. I feel like this computer always knows when we need it to not to work well.
So Chris, if you're able to share, if you just go ahead and click the share screen button and then share your presentation, I think it'll automatically stop her sharing and share yours. But
okay.
And you may not. I can't remember if we practiced with you or not, so we may be putting you on the spot a bit here. Okay, yeah, that looks fine.
Is up?
Yeah, and if you want to go into presentation mode.
Awesome. Tell me when, and we can do the last few slides that we have.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
There's no questions, so I'd say go ahead and move forward.
Okay, awesome. So thanks, Chris. See, we know we always have to have a plan B and C. That's one of our lessons learned. Okay, so we wanted to just take a few minutes and kind of talk about some of the lessons that we learned with this regional program. I think it's one of the first, if not the first, regional outreach program that Sea Grant has really undertaken, just with a staff of fully dedicated folks. So with any new program, you know that there's also some growing pains. So some of the challenges have been, we each work for a different Sea Grant program, and that is awesome in some ways because it allows us flexibility where if we want to get something done and there's one Sea Grant program that can really funnel that through their system, we can start there. But it also is hard because when we have to keep things consistent among all universities or all Sea Grant programs, sometimes we can run into challenges just trying to find something that works for all of the 5 universities. So also another challenge with having so many different players involved in our program is that we have a lot of reviewers. So those publications that you saw, they take a long time to go through the review process. And that's just because we want to make sure that, everyone's comfortable with them. They go through a technical review process where we let anybody who's cited in the publication look it over and make sure that they feel comfortable with how we've interpreted their results. So those have kind of been some of our challenges. And Chris, if you click one more, my little special buddy will pop up. And so how we've overcome these challenges, the first thing is we have lots of patience. And then also we stay in really close communication. We really work well as a team. We used to have weekly conference calls. Now we have them every other week just to stay up with what's going on. Again, it works really well that we each have a different topic that we focus on. And the reason that works well is if, we get a question about some complex, chemical question, we let Emily answer it because that's what her training's in. So we are able to really work as a team to answer questions. The next slide, just a few lessons that we've learned related to working with our different stakeholders. The first one is focuses on partnerships. And if you go to the next slide, we've really had to kind of learn our place in, especially in the emergency response world. So, like we said, we have 11 different audiences, and some of them Sea Grant has worked with in the past, and some we haven't. And emergency responders, there's some Sea Grant programs that do work closely with the Coast Guard and other folks, but other, like our Sea Grant program, Mississippi, Alabama, we hadn't worked that closely with those folks. So we really had to figure out what our role was. You guys might be familiar with the NOAA Scientific Support Coordinators, and those are folks that within the time of a disaster, like if there is a spill, those are the folks that really work closely with the Coast Guard to give them the best available science. And so when we were kind of the new kids on the block, it took us some time to kind of develop these relationships and also to really figure out what our role was. So we decided that the scientific support coordinators, the SSCs, during the response, when we are in a response, that is when they take the lead for that information, giving information to the Coast Guard. And when we're outside of the response, our outreach team can go to the area committee meetings and share information with them. So it was important to kind of define our roles so that everybody could do the best work they could do, and also felt comfortable with us being involved. We also hadn't worked very closely with the health community, and that was when it took us some time to really build trust and define our role. So with the next slide, speaking of building trust, that was another thing. I think Chris and I both have worked in the fishing industry before we took these roles. I got my master's in fisheries science working on trawl vessels, and I know that it takes a long time to really create trusted relationships with some of our audiences. And the fishing industry and the tourism industry are two audiences that we work with, and Sea Grant has worked with them very closely. You guys know we have lots of agents that work with both of those audiences, but this was, again, a new player in the mix. So it did take us a little bit of time to develop trust with these audiences, and during this process, we really relied heavily on those Sea Grant extension agents. So thanks to all those folks that helped us build those trusted relationships. And just some examples of the success that we've had. One example is we have someone who's very involved with the tourism industry over in Alabama. Anytime they see a news article come out where you could tell that the title is kind of clickbait or kind of skewed a little bit, the first thing they do is they just copy that link and send it to our team and ask, is there any relevance in this? Like, is this actually true? So that shows that they know we're here to get information from. And another example that just happened earlier this year was, we get a lot of reports of fish lesions. That's why, as Chris said, we had that publication. But which we had not seen. People would complain to us about oil on the bottom or fish lesions or mutations, but no one ever followed through. We always would put the offer out there, but no one would ever follow through with photos. And I think we finally have kind of gained that trust and broken that barrier where we got, someone followed through and sent us a picture of a lesion, which we were able to send to a researcher, and they said that it wasn't a lesion. I think it was actually like a broken down nematode. I need to double check on that. But the scientist said it was more than likely not due to the spill, and that the fish was safe to eat. So it was really great that we had that trust, and we were able to, to help that person identify what was wrong with that fish. So next slide, another challenge that I think, if you guys have been involved with any disaster response, you know that when a disaster occurs, it's one of the challenges is addressing concerns quickly, but also with accurate information. And this is hard because sometimes information isn't available, or you don't know who to go to get that accurate information. And it's important, to address questions quickly, because we don't address them with science, then we know that other groups might come in and address them with misinformation. So this is another example of where it's really important to have these trusted partnerships. And not only so we can get that the best information during the time of the disaster, so that's related to having those relationships with the Coast Guard and our NOAA SSCs, but also we want to have those trusted partnerships in place so that stakeholders know to come to us. And one example was the Green Canyon spill, which is a spill that happened recently. I think it was actually last fall, but it was within the last year off of the coast of Louisiana. Julie Felgu, who you guys I'm sure all know, Julie is really involved with the fishing industry and also the emergency response community, but she was starting to get questions from fishermen about this spill, and they were really concerned. And so Julie was able to reach out to Emily, who's our oil spill specialist in Louisiana, and Emily was able to reach out to her contacts and get up-to-date, accurate information in a timely manner, and then give that back to Julie, who could relay that back to the fishing industry. So I know that sounds like a lot of steps there, but it happened in the matter, a matter of like a couple of minutes, hours. It was just showed that we really do have these connections, and we're able to get that timely information to folks and accurate. So the next slide, just 2 more slides here, but we wanted to mention a little bit about staying relevant. So one thing that we found is that our stakeholders definitely have a varying level of interest with the information that we're sharing with them. So you would expect that folks like emergency responders and natural resource managers, this is still oil spill science, this is still part of their day-to-day job. So they are very interested in our science seminars, our outreach publications, things like that. But other folks that could use the information, sometimes we have a little bit of a harder time reaching out to them. And again, fishing and tourism industries and elected officials, those are some of those groups. And I think that's because, as you guys would guess, they have more pressing issues that sometimes pull them away from learning about a disaster that happened 7 years ago. So like Chris said, we're really trying to make more targeted outreach products that'll do a better job of answering their specific questions and maybe hold their attention a little bit better. And also, if you go to the next slide, this is one thing that we've heard, and we've heard this loud and clear from our extension agents. It's kind of this concept of developing outreach materials that we call, in case of emergency, break glass. And so we know that there's some of these audiences that, our grant says we should work with, and maybe, like I said, maybe they're not as interested because it's not as pressing, or maybe they kind of don't want to hear about the oil spill anymore. That's the case with the fishing industry in some cases, and the tourism industry, especially the tourism industry. They don't really want us giving information about the impacts of the oil spill to some of their folks, just because they don't want to scare people off. So anyway, we've kind of, one approach we've taken for phase 2 is to develop some of these outreach products that maybe will be useful. They'll be useful for some of our stakeholders, but maybe not all of them right away. And if there is another spill, then we'll have these products all ready to go. In case of that emergency, we can break the glass and start giving them out to our stakeholders. So with that, surprisingly, my computer has finally decided that it wants to work again. So I can see the slides, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask us. Yeah, we're happy to, and just like Chris said too, if you have any topics that we didn't mention today that you really think your stakeholders would be interested in, or questions that you guys have about the oil spill or just oil spills in general, please let us know.
Alrighty, so we'll just take a minute and hang around in case there are any questions. You guys can see their contact information there if you'd like to contact them. And again, for folks, there'll be I'll put a link to that. This recording will be available within a few days at this Learn event. So I'll put that in chat. So feel free to share that with colleagues or friends that were not able to join us. Okay, so no questions. Any closing thoughts, Larissa or Chris?
I'll just say thank you to all of you guys for tuning in, and for those that might listen to the recording, feel free to reach out to us if you do have any questions. Just our emails are there, and we're here for all of you guys.
Okay. All righty, thanks. So thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.